welcome to Vyas, India's higher education channel benefiting students across the country. I am Smeta Mishra, and today we have with us Mr. Qamar Agha, well-known academician and commentator on international relations. Mr. Agha, you're very welcome to this episode on a brief history of international relations. So let's start by talking about how do we trace the study of international relations? How far do we go back?
You see, actually the modern concept of international relations, it is started with the Treaty of Westphalia. That was sometime, 1648. That was the period when it was started. And this was the first time, they have defined the concept of the modern nation state. And they have also discovered the legal concept of sovereignty, because before that there was no such concepts. The most important thing, they also defined who should be the head of the state or the government or the ruler. There are no equal within the territory, and there are no superior outside the territory. So the ultimate authority lies with the ruler of that country. These are the concepts developed at that time. This is very important, in dealing with the relation with one another countries. But actually, if we go into the theories of international relation, that has evolved, in fact, after the Second World War.
But even before we go into that, I wanted to ask you, India, let's go into ancient India. We had, even before 1648, relations between not nation states, but, between empires and between, would you highlight that as well?
You see, Europe, the history started from Westphalia, but as far as the East is concerned, there were several ancient civilizations, and then we have empires like Byzantium Empire, then Persian Empire, then Indian Empire at that time, or the Chinese. Here the relations were going on. Envoys used to come from one country to another. Then ancient, if you read the Mahabharata or Ramayana, you would find details of account of how the envoys have come from one state to another. Relations were there. Chanakya was one of the finest diplomat, also mentioned there. Maurya's time. So they were there in the Eastern Europe. It was there, but at that time the concept of modern nation state wasn't developed. These envoys used to travel from one country to another, or seek support. One ruler used to seek support from the other ruler, or build up a fight against the third or aggressor. But there was no system of collective security. If you look at the modern nation state, in international relations now, it's based on two things: balance of power and the concept of collective security. So therefore, it actually emerged after the Second World War.
So didn't the balance of power principle fail, because of which we had World War I?
The same thing, again and again it comes up. You can't ignore that also.
Yes.
Because when you have big powers, so it has to be balanced. That was the concept. Tried. The first book of international relations was written by E.H. Carr. That was when it was 1939. And the second was Hans Morgenthau.
Yes.
These two books available. As a subject, it was introduced first time in 48 in England, in the universities. Before that, it wasn't there. And it was, the best thing was happening was institutionalizing of the international relation by establishing the United Nations. Various theories have also emerged.
But Mr. Agha, before we go into World War II politics and international relations, then let's talk a little bit about the theories, the concepts of international relations.
You see, various theories have emerged in international. Two are the most important one. One was positivist and post-positivist. They were further divided into realism and liberalism. These schools were further divided into various other sub-schools. So we have all these. Whereas realism school, if we look at this school, they believe in the unitary as state as a model, one unit. Whereas if you look at the liberalism, it believes in multipolarity. It believes in plurality that way, Then they believe that in state action it allows. They said that why should a state confined only to have political or security arrangements with other states, They also believe that the economic and cultural ties are equally important. So that way, they have the whole range of relationship they have developed. They believe that the interdependence is very important. Economic interdependence or security relations among the states are very important. They believe that if you have economic cooperation between the two states, that increases the security of the region, or that increases the security of the region. So this is what generally, and the further, then it was also included that the class, the gender, the other aspect of the life, that was also included.
So if we look at the umbrella theories, like you said, positivist and post-positivist. So can we then say that positivist theories are actually looking at like reality, facts, whereas do post-positivists introduce a certain sense of normativity, values?
That is basically Americans,
Okay.
If you look at the Europe, the problem was in Europe, Here the most important thing before them was security, because the whole system developed after the post-colonial era and the Second World War. So for them the security was the most important, and immediately after the Second World War the Cold War came in.
Yes.
So look at the condition in which the international relations have evolved in Europe and America, because these are things, all the theories have developed or evolved in the Western nations, So Americans have different, they were living at peace. So they had time to discuss gender issues, class issues and many other issues, whereas Europe, they were obsessed with the security, because they said no more war, peace should be developed, United Nations, institutionalizing of the international relation, these were the concerns.
But despite these various theories, I think we did have certain concepts that were foundational, like power, polarity, interdependence, no matter what the theory.
I have already mentioned, that this is the basis of interdependence, is one of the basis of international relations, or power for that matter, These are the basis of any international relations, First the theories, they have developed the concept. Concept was sovereignty, sovereign, ruler, nation state, gradually coming back to the collective security concept emerge, These are the concept later emerge, post-war concept emerging. So these are the basics.
So let's move on to what happened to international relations during the Cold War.
Cold War, the big problem, the world was divided into two camps. The East and the West, we call it, the Soviet Union and the United States of America. These are the two major power emerged. So world was bipolar at that time. So there was a pressure, the collective security system evolved in the Europe, foundation of the NATO forces. Other side we have saw the Warsaw Pact allies, So the virtually, it was the worst period. No major wars have taken place, but the regional conflicts going on, in the or we call it the Arab-Israeli conflict for that matter, or you see the Vietnam War, the Korean crisis. Similarly, in Africa, several wars have taken place during, we call it proxy war. This was the period, the big powers were not fighting among themselves, because they were the nuclear power state, but the proxy war was going on at that period. This was the worst period that continued almost 40-50 years, of the history, But at that time, this was the Europe, whereas if you look at Asia, or particularly India, here we have developed a new concept, India decided not to join any military alliance, and the concept of non-alignment emerged in India. Nehru gave a concept of non-alignment, which was immediately accepted by most of the countries.
The colossal expenditure of energy and resources on armaments, that is an outstanding feature of many national budgets today, does not solve the problem of world peace. Perhaps even a fraction of that outlay in other ways and for other purposes will provide a more enduring basis for peace and happiness.
It was a very big force has emerged. They decided not to align with any country. Then they started exploiting, some of the countries started exploiting the superpower rivalry in their interest, and it started developing. India was one of them, has emerged during this Cold War era.
A lot of countries also became independent during this period. There were decolonization movements as well.
The decolonization movement started soon after the Second World War.
Okay.
So India was the first country got independence 47, and after that by 50s, most of the countries, by early 60s, most of the countries in Asia, Africa, they got independence.
How did the Cold War really come to an end? Can we say that it came to an end, and then how it started?
It came to an end because of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Soviets' involvement in Afghanistan, the arms race, unending arms race which was going on. So a huge economic crisis came in Soviet Union because of the war in Afghanistan, the unending arm race with the United States which they have, then the economic crisis, internal economic crisis, unemployment grew, and a stage come where the Soviet Union disintegrated. They find it difficult to hold the union, and it was disintegrated. But the problem came, that gave rise to the emergence of a unipolar world, or the United States emerged as the only superpower in the world.
But in 1991, I think when Soviet Union disintegrated, what was the impact on other countries, not just the US or polarity, but also in terms of other countries?
You see, always the impact comes on the third world countries or the developing nation, The pressure, this was the period when the concept of globalization, free trade emerged. Pressure came on the world, to globalize, liberalize their economy, denationalize their public sector companies. So, if you look at this period, you will find focus was mainly on economics rather than politics. Then another problem came, United States started, started asserting its position like new concept. Earlier they were using policy of containment. Now the United States started using policy of regime change came, which we have seen in Iraq, or in the case of Iran or Afghanistan, the regime change concept came. So these are the new concept evolved at that time.
So when all this was happening, what about international organizations like the United Nations? What role was the UN playing in all this?
You see, United Nations was because new challenges has also come. In the third world, the problem came in the form of militancy or other problems, emerged after the disintegration of Soviet Union. The crisis in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and many other countries, the Eastern Europe, first. Then terrorism became a very major problem.
We also had at that time, just before that, the Persian Gulf War. And
Gulf War was continued for about 8 years, and then the second war, Saddam was removed, or Afghanistan, Taliban, become very powerful. So these were the challenges before the international community. And in fact, India was the worst affected because of this. Because, the problem, first the Afghanistan, then these terrorists started coming to Kashmir, and the other areas were affected. So these were the problems,
So you mean there's an introduction of non-state actors basically with this?
State started weakening, started failing. Number of states started failing, because they were model on Cold War regime, they haven't changed, they haven't evolved themselves. So it started failing, and as a result, the non-state actors have become very powerful in some of the states, which led to like failure of a state in Afghanistan for that matter. After the Soviet withdrawal, Afghanistan could not have a stable government, because foreign interference also from Pakistan was going on.
Okay, but then as we move on, and we are living in a more of a globalized world. So what impact does globalization have on international relations between countries?
Now, the concept of regional cooperation, economic cooperation is coming up. Economic is the main factor now, determining the foreign policies of most of the countries. So concept of regional economic cooperation have come. If you look at this period, last 20 years, several regional organizations have emerged, like SAARC, in South Asia, then South ASEAN in Southeast Asia we have, then many other, each and every region has. It was decided that okay fine, the one country alone cannot develop. So there is a need, if you have economic cooperation among the region, that would help develop the whole region. So so that is the thing, it's a globalized world where capital and labor, and products are moving freely from one country to another country. Another good thing happened, no major wars are taking place. The license regimes are going, from this, tariffs are reducing, import and export are becoming common, people are opening their economy, free economy, So that way it has reduced the tension, but new challenges are always there.
So apart from these economic arrangements, were there also other kind of arrangements? I mean, you did mention NATO in terms of security. How has security arrangements, how have they evolved with globalization? Have changes happened?
You see, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the problem came again, how to protect the peace in the world. So NATO expansion is started. First, they incorporated NATO and European Union. European Union is one of the most successful model people. Most of the regional organizations emulate that. All these organizations, whether the regional organization, are modeled on European Union, because it's they have common monetary. They have developed the monetary system also. The euro has become a denominator. Then other countries also started following. Then NATO, with several countries joined the NATO as well as European of the East European, who were earlier part of the Soviet Union or were Soviet satellites, we call it, them. Now they are part of the European Union. Similarly, they expand to many other countries. NATO has now come up to the Afghanistan, which is very close to us, providing fighting with the war on terror. So that way security arrangement has still, but challenges are still there, because we have witnessed that the non-state actors as you mentioned, especially the terrorist organization which are operating in from Afghanistan, Pakistan and to many other countries have become and many states in East Africa or in the Arab world, particularly Yemen, Somalia, they are failing, So the biggest challenge before the international community, how to contain this problem at the
problem
moment.
Of failed states.
Failed state, and that giving rise to the militancy or terrorism, how to challenge that,
But one thing that I've always thought of is, you have India and China who are strong economic powers now, they're rising economic powers. But why is it that they don't wield a strong influence politically in the international arena?
No, I believe, now because world is too big, and after the disintegration of Soviet Union, United States dominated the world politics for almost 15 years. But now the European economy or the Western nations economy, including America, is now recession. They have come out of the recession, but their growth rate is very slow. They are finding it difficult to dominate the global politics now. Now, number of demands have started emerging. One is people are demanding, most of the countries are demanding that expansion of the Security Council, because that was modeled on the 50s, early 40s or 50s model, more and more countries. Now, it's a multipolar world is emerging. There are many centers of power have emerged in the last 10 years or 10 or 15 years. India is one of them, India, China, then Brazil in Latin America, then we have South Africa. These are very powerful countries which have emerged. We have countries, these countries have their economies of more than $1 trillion. And the growth rates in these countries are 8 to 10% or 12% growth rate, They are competing with the Western nation on number of issues, With the globalization, the huge market has emerged in these countries, In these countries, you have big educated middle class and a very large managerial class available in these countries, So, as a result, and cheap labor is also available, technical manpower. So, a lot of companies, different sectors of companies, are migrating to India, from Western Europe to India, transfer of technologies, IT sector, we are doing very well. So these are emerging as a very powerful country, and therefore they want to assert their role in the international community also. These are the countries are also demanding a seat in the Permanent Security Council. So a new thing is emerging, evolving, the pattern, and I believe the multipolar world is emerging.
So despite, while some would say that the US is very much dominating the world today, you would still say that there is hope for a multipolar world, or there are patterns that lead to multipolarity?
You see, the recession and slowing down of the American economy is forcing America to concentrate more on national issues. Unemployment is rising there. They have a huge debt of about $2-3 trillion. These are the problems America is facing internally. I don't think Americans would be able to dominate or maintain the same level of military all over the world. Now, this is the phase, if you look at, they are withdrawing from Iraq. They have also announced that next year by July they will withdraw from Afghanistan also. They are trying to find out some solution for Afghanistan, and they are also dealing with India, China and many other countries, trying to find for regional security arrangements are emerging. So, I don't think that they can continue to play the same role as they were doing during the Bush administration or soon after the when the Cold War has ended. Things are moving very fast. Economic growth of the developing nation is very fast. And the second thing, another most important thing, the Western European nations, earlier they used to have monopoly over the technology. Now they don't have that technology. India, China, Japan, then many other, Brazil, or for that matter South Africa, we also have technology. And apart from this, there are a number of developing nations who are not so developed. They don't need very sophisticated technology which is available in the West. So these nations can provide.
So along with these patterns of multipolarity, do you also see more of people participation as an emerging international relations trend in processes? For instance, in Iran, we had people participating through the internet in terms of protests and stuff.
You see, this phenomena started with the globalization first, with the media, available. Now you can the communication, the fast communication which we have, internet and many other sorts of alternate media also emerge. So large number of people are participating. Then there are a number of non-governmental organizations emerging, which are also a factor in international politics, like human rights groups. They are very actively involved. They have a group, within the United Nations, sanctioned by the United Nations. They have a commission there. So similarly, women organizations, number of women organizations supported by United Nations. So these are the individual or groups, which are part of the international relations now, which earlier they had no voice. So now they have a very powerful voice.
So if I want to summarize for our students, like, what would you consider the most important landmarks as a summary of the brief history of international relations? What do they take away from here?
I think the establishment of the modern nation state, then concept of sovereignty which they have developed, then later the collective security arrangement which has emerged, then institutionalization of international relations in United Nations by forming the United Nations, and then later how they avoided the war between the two big powers, and now the globalization. I can sum it like this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Agha, for this very interesting discussion on international relations. Next time we will be back again to discuss another aspect of international relations. Thank you for your time now, and goodbye.